In this video, we're looking at data science, a history, and evolution. So what we're going to do is we're going to hop into our time machine. We're going to travel way back to a long time ago, and we're going to look at a civilization called the ancient Sumerians. And they were around about 5,000 years ago right here into what would be considered modern day Iraq. And they are credited with some very big things. They were the inventors of the wheel, for one, but what we are going to look at them for is that they were actually the inventors of data collection. And what they would do is they would take these clay tablets and they would record taxes on them, and they would also record harvests so they could keep track of the seasons and how good the harvests were for that year. And they used very simple methods, mostly just tallies, simple basic tallies. Again, this was 5,000 years ago, so they had to make do with what they had. But what we're going to look at is the evolution from those clay tablets all the way to today, where now we can look up pretty much anything on our phones. And so from 5,000 years ago, there was really not much progress in the field of data collection and data science until the year 1890. And then there was another big leap in the year 1947. So we're going to look at both of these and see what happened and how the field has now progressed to where you can look up anything on your phone. So let's look at what happened from the Sumerians to 1890. And there was, like I said, very little progress in the fields of data science and data collection. Pretty much all civilizations either recorded no data back then, or they would record data on very basic things. The main ones would be taxes, farming and agriculture, and then just populations and population growth. Those are about the only three things that civilizations would collect data on. That is, like I said, until the invention of the Hollerith tabulating machine, and this was invented in 1890 by this guy right here named Herman Hollerith. And the machine itself looked like this, and what it was used for, it was used to assist and make the US Census process more efficient. You know how we're always talking about being more efficient in the field of data science? That's exactly what this machine did. And what it did, it used punch cards so you could more quickly collect data on things like age, gender, and marital status of the population. The punch cards look like this, and it allowed them, instead of doing this one by one, you could now do hundreds at a time, and it just made everything much faster. And this was the first invention of its kind, and it really sparked the data processing industry because people realized you can really gather all this stuff faster and more efficiently. And that was a very big step in the field, but maybe not as big as this next one right here, the invention of the transistor. And the first transistor was successfully created in 1947 at Bell Laboratories, which at this point was a subsidiary of AT&T, which is the company you know today. The three inventors pictured here were William Shockley, John Bardeen, and Walter Britton, and the original transistor looked something very rudimentary like this. So you might be asking, how could something that basic looking be such a huge catapult? And this is why, is because what the transistor did is it allowed for electricity to be controlled in a way similar to how water is controlled using water pipes. So if you have water flowing through a pipe, you can control where it goes based on the valve there. And with the invention of the transistor, now you could do something very similar with electricity, which was huge. And this would end up evolving into something way bigger than I think they even could have realized in 1947, and that is the advent of the early computer chips, which look very basic and rudimentary like that. But that eventually would evolve into the computer chips that we know today that look like this, and those allow us to do everything we do on our phones and computers, which essentially function like magic boxes where you can pretty much do anything on. But that's not the only reason why the field of data science started to take off. The other reason is that by the time of the invention of the transistor, American business had grown so much that businesses had already begun compiling data on more and more things, and that led to what I call the data science golden combo. And what the golden combo was businesses starting to compile more data combined with the invention of computers, and that would lead to the birth of data science. Because before computers were invented, when businesses started compiling data, they did everything on paper. So if you're an account manager, you have to go find a file like this. It's all on paper. And it was in a thing called the filing system. Everything was in, all these companies and organizations had filing systems where a piece of paper like this would then be stored into a file folder like this, which would then be stacked with a bunch of different file folders like this. which would then be stacked into what these filing cabinets like this would be. So all the ones would go here, here, and here. And so you have all these files in single filing cabinets, but then there's thousands, hundreds of other filing cabinets stored everywhere else. So if you wanted to go look for a certain file, you'd have to first find the right filing cabinet, and then you would have to go pull the files from that cabinet, and then you would have to find the right folder right here, and then you would have to find the paper stacked in that folder. So this is how businesses and organizations previously stored files. But as the transistor allowed computers to evolve, it then allowed us to store everything on computers. And that was an absolute game changer, because now you could store that folder in there, and you could actually take all of your data that used to be physical storage, and now you could just host it all on computers. And that saved a lot of time, effort, energy, and it really changed the ball game for data science. And the evolution of folders to the computer went kind of something like this. So first it was files, and then we actually moved to something called a floppy disk, is what they used to store digital files in the 80s. And then the floppy disk evolved into the CD-ROM, which is how files were stored in the 90s and early 2000s. And now everything is stored on what we call the cloud. I know you hear this term all the time, but what is it? Let's look real closely at what is the cloud. So the cloud is really just the ability to host data on a third party. So now pretty much all data is stored on third-party servers, which is now commonly known as the cloud. So AWS, Amazon Web Services, is the biggest one. Microsoft Azure is another really big one, and Google Cloud is another really big player in this field. So most companies host their data now on these companies' servers. So the cloud is just a third-party server that hosts your data. And because of the cloud, nearly all data is now stored and organized into digital databases, and this is huge. So what even is a database? Just real quickly, a database is an organized collection of structured information or data typically stored electronically in a computer system. So a shorter way to think of that is it's just a digital place to store data, and it's usually organized. And what this has done is that online databases have given us access to nearly anything that we need to find. So pretty much any company that you can think of is just taking in as much data as possible. So let's look at some of those examples. Instagram, Amazon, Chipotle, YouTube is an online video database, the biggest in the world. TikTok is another online video database with a different interface to it. Facebook, online user database. Even our school that we're at, we have a student database. Spotify is a music database. Zillow is a housing database. Etsy is an e-commerce database. Nike has a bunch of different databases, from physical stores to e-commerce store and all stores they do business with. And so pretty much the way to think about it is that every major company has all these massive databases that they're constantly sorting through. And then there's also databases that you can personally look up. As examples are Amazon, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify. So those would be databases that you have access to yourself. So that's how we got here. I hope this video was a quick little recap of a good history and evolution of data science.